Hi, I'm Mary Lou Tompkins.
My name is Catherine Corneil.
Hello, I'm Joan Snyder, and this is my husband, John.
As my wife indicated, I'm John Snyder.
I was born in 1947, December. Lived in Lindsay my whole life, except the 1 year I went to Peterborough Teachers College.
I was born in Lindsay, July the 19th, 1938. I was baptized here at St. Andrew's Church in May of the following year, attended Sunday school, sang in the choir. I done the secretarial work from 1960 to 66 for Reverend Orville Locke, and done the presbytery work for him.
John and I were married in Duff's Church, Morriston. It's a Presbyterian church near Guelph, and moved into the Briarwood apartment on Coburn Street. John had already been in Lindsay for 6 months teaching at Sir Sanford Fleming College. We hadn't really picked a church yet when we first came, but we were checking out a few. And since we both had a Presbyterian background and had met through the Presbyterian Young Peoples, we attended St. Andrew's. When you first go to a church, you don't know anybody, and it's a little bit daunting to be sitting in a big church. But Reverend Orville Locke was the minister. He was a fairly big man, mostly bald, and very friendly. And our oldest children later came to recall him as the friendly minister who greeted them when they came to the side entrance to go to Sunday school. He always had candies in his pocket for them. Reverend Locke wasted no time in coming to visit us as a young couple in his church and welcoming us to Lindsay. I remember back then, if the minister came to your home, it was a very big deal. And he came. I was in the midst of cooking a duck for the first time, and he came and he visited and he stayed and chatted with us so long that when he left, the duck was pretty dry. So we had a bit of a chuckle over that, but we really felt welcomed by him. Reverend Locke and his wife Dorothy were a real team. Dorothy attended every ladies group and was a wonderful ambassador for St. Andrew's. So we ultimately stayed at St. Andrew's and raised our 4 children, Michael, Amy, Matthew, and Tina here. And we have also seen 2 of our grandchildren, Gracie and Ian, attend as well.
I was in Endicott, and my father was Milton, and he was an elder of the church, as well as his brother Jim and Sam. And my grandfather was also an elder. And my dad's sister, Hattie Mae, taught Sunday school for years and years. When I came to, like I'm talking in the 40s, when I was in Sunday school, there was about 100 in Sunday school. And it was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I was scared to death as we'd walk to Sunday school every Sunday afternoon because the old bridge on Wellington Street had the slats and you could see through the railing. I thought I was going to fall between the cracks or under the railing. Of course I couldn't possibly have, but as a little kid, it really was a worry to me.
I remember coming to Sunday school was always at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sundays. And I remember there was always a pathway up along the Legion by the river. And we were told in the winter never to go on that pathway, but I was raised on King Street, so it was a shortcut rather than go up around Kent Street. So one day in March, when we were coming home from Sunday school, and the town had always dumped all their snow down below, and it was quite icy, and I remember quite vividly. My mother had got made a camel hair coat, and it had beaver fur on the cuffs and the collar, and I was pretty proud of what I called my fur coat. And as we were coming down this pathway we weren't supposed to be on, I slipped and I slid down and slid into the river on top of the chunks of ice, and my brothers pulled me out. But when I got home, my mother was more concerned about the condition of my coat than me falling in the river.
Grew up I went to church in Willowdale, and we went in for 9 o'clock Sunday school. And that was before church, and then there was Sunday school. That was the
Sunday
older
school
ones,
was,
I guess?
yeah, same for me. Sunday school was an hour before, and then church was after.
Another thing that I remember vividly about the church, in July of every year, there was one Sunday that there was no church service in the church, and all the families would have huge picnic baskets packed, and we would go down to the train station at the end of Durham Street about 8:30 on the Sunday morning, get on the train. There'd be about 8 coaches, and they'd all be full, and we'd go up to Couchiching Park at Orillia, and as soon as we'd get off the train, you'd get a picnic table and put your basket there, and then there was a church service up at one end on the grass. There was a short church service, and then the rest of the day you could enjoy your picnic basket and swim, and there were games organized in the afternoon, and I remember that was the highlight of the summer.
Now we have.
Well, they had to put that new building
That's the
on,
gym.
that building is an addition.
Yeah, it was
Was
put
it-
on in 62. The church done an expansion in 1962, and it was completed in the 1st of December, and the first event in the expansion was the reception of the wedding of my husband and I.
Well, it had a balcony around it.
Oh yeah, before, yeah.
And little stage, because I
Yeah,
came
there
to
was a little
Brownies here.
stage.
I used to love evening
Yeah,
services.
McQueen
They
had
had
evening services. Of course, the choir had to come, and there'd be about 9 people. Yeah, like quite elderly people. But they would come for the 11 o'clock service, and they'd come for the 7 o'clock service. Lloyd McGinnis and his mother and father
Remember
always
Lloyd?
sat over on this side, about 4 seats up from the front. Elsie and John Riseborough, they came both morning and night. Harvey's mother and father.
Yeah, would it be the same
Same,
music?
same music, same sermon.
Just a repeat of the Sunday morning service,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, but when Orville Locke came, there was no evening service.
Except on anniversary. Anniversary Sunday, there'd be an evening service because the choir was expected to be there. There was the male quartet. There was the layman's choir when we first started, as well as the senior choir. The junior intermediate, it was called back then, became the junior. We had sunbeams, the juniors, the youth, teens, and the senior. And then, of course, there was the Living Christmas Tree eventually. Before that, there was Gaither's Alleluia that became a real ministry as well.
Our 4 children started in the Sunbeam Choir, went through the junior up to the youth, the teen choir, and Amy and Mike, our oldest 2, for a short while were even in the senior choir.
I've always been involved with music and got involved with the choirs. So Bob, in the beginning of the 80s, in 1981, in the fall, we went up to Collingwood. I remember going and to see a presentation of a Christmas cantata in a tree structure, sort of called the Living Christmas Tree concept. In the fall of 81, that structure was actually for St. Andrews, built, and Bill Morrill was the one who engineered the design and the construction of the tree. Bob had gone to Bill to see whether he thought it would be feasible to put this kind of a structure in St. Andrews, and Bill came in and did some measurements, and Bill came up with a brand new structure for us. And initially it was built in Bill's shop, Balmoral Construction. They had a shop. They took it to the fairgrounds and constructed it under the grandstands there. When the tree was brought in, we'd had to remove all the pews from the choir loft, and they were huge and very heavy, and it took a big crew to get them out, and we would take them out and store them somewhere off the grounds here. And then the structure would come in. The reason it got switched over to artificial greenery is rather interesting, because I believe the fire chief came one evening and he saw this huge tree with all this cedar at the front of the church, and he kind of maybe freaked out or got very concerned that it was a fire hazard. From there, all the safety procedures that were currently in place, which includes fire extinguishers and people stationed at various locations as emergency personnel to look after any kind of hazardous situation that might arise, We've never had an issue with the tree.
Reverend McQueen's wife ran a CGIT group, and at Christmas we always had a candlelight service at night. We'd have to stand at the back and come down to the front holding these candles. One of the highlights of Sunday school was the Christmas concert. I remember vividly, and it was always held about the middle of December. Carl Scott, who was a member of the church, always played Santa Claus, and each class would practice for 3 or 4 weeks before. We'd all have our own little program we'd present to the families. The church would be pretty well full downstairs and partially up, and each class would have their little presentation for the evening, and the minister at the time was Reverend McQueen, and I remember he'd say, "Now I can hear something jingle." The north door in the balcony all of a sudden would fly open, and Carl Scott would come through, "Ho, ho, ho, Merry Christmas," and he'd go and come down the stairs, and of course we'd just be screaming and yelling. We were so excited. All the children would get a present, and it was either a coloring book or some kind of a little book to read. But that was, I can remember, one of the highlights of Sunday school, and that took place every year. And every year in the Santa Claus parade, he'd drive the float.
Mm-hmm.
He'd get a farm tractor from John Walden,
Yeah.
and I can still see him coming up Kent Street. He had a Santa hat on and driving the tractor and waving at everybody.
And after that, John would always get his truck because he was in the snowplow business. He would want to be pulling the float.
I remember as a kid growing up, especially on Christmas morning, you'd open your presents at 6 or 7 in the morning, and then you'd tear out down the street to all your friends and go to their house to see what they got for Christmas. And there was a family by the name of LaMantia that had a house just around the corner, and Mr. LaMantia would invite us all down, all the kids down on Christmas Day, and he'd toast chestnuts in the open fireplace, and that was quite a treat for us.
I became very involved in the WMS, which is one of the oldest groups in St. Andrew's Church. According to some of the old minutes that I have, it was in 1876 that the first proposal for a Women's Board of Mission was formed, and later the Foreign Missionary Society was formed in 1880. It didn't join the Presbyterian until 1882, and a Women's Missionary Home Society was later organized. Those two were put together and became the WMS in May 21st, 1914 at St. Andrews.
And there was the Go Forth,
Go Forth.
and the Women's League.
Was there a lot of crossover between these groups and sort of cross-pollination of effort?
Yeah.
But they weren't the same members, though, were they?
No.
Because it surprised me nowadays, there are some people that are in WMS that are also in Mary Martha's and in the Daughters. And I think,
we're kind of
oh, back in the old days,
No.
they were very separate.
Well, there was so many people in the congregation when Orville Locke came that these groups just flourished.
And when I first started coming in the late 60s, I remember Elsie Hall, who was a young one in the Mary Martha's, and she invited me to join them, but I was only 20. And I thought they were all so old because they must have been 30. But you know, when you're 20, everybody seems old.
Sheila Mabel, who was also from St. Andrews, Phil and Sheila Mabel were also from came to St. Andrews from the college. Sheila was very involved in the Women's Missionary Society, and she is the one that got me involved. They were getting older, and she invited 4 of us younger women to join to help out, and then ultimately she got me into the role as president, and I've kind of been there ever since. So a group of us parents got together and led the youth group, and we did it as teams of married couples, and I would say that that was probably our social life for that time. We did a lot of fun things with the kids.
I know it was really significant for my boys to be part of PYPS. And because they went to conventions, they went to Rise Up, they went to Triennium. What amazes me is the friendships that they made.
When we came, things were in a lull. in the set.
Well,
72, 73.
77 this is, and Karen.
And then she took us through a whole process
She-
from head
yeah.
office to
Yeah,
rearrange things and make it exciting for the kids and.
and that was,
Well, and we would adopt a room as families and paint it
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
and
yeah.
Fix it all up
We
and
did the nursery.
change the whole appearance
Which
and
is now the safe room.
atmosphere in the Sunday school.
Yeah. And that was the first year, 77, she came and she did that, the first year the young people went to a convention. In many, many years, yeah. And got to see that there were other kids in Presbyterian young people's.
Yeah. Bob in 1968 had been hired at St. Andrews as the organist and choir director. Well, once we were married, and he always commuted for his teaching job. You know, if the weather was bad, I had a key to the church, so I'd come down and let the kids in, into the fellowship room, it was called back in those days, and wait for Bob to come to start practice. Then it got that if it was really bad weather and he was going to take a little longer coming, I knew what the hymns were for Sunday, so I'd start by going over the hymns with them. And then it got that I'd start to talk about the messages. Or then, well, I know he's going to work on this anthem, so I might get started with that, and we'd discuss it. And that's how it evolved, that I became part of the music team.
Bob and Mary Lou didn't just teach the children to sing music, they also had an extensive lending library of Christian books and videos, and they would teach them, much like a Sunday school, the meaning behind the words, because it was important to them that the children understood the words that they were singing.
Bob would train the choirs, but I did most of the talking and sharing what the messages were all about. There was a concern that young people, the little ones, were just being babysat. And we felt very strongly, by then we had young children ourselves, we felt that you need to nurture little children right from the start. And so this idea of a little tots choir was germinating. The lady that was helping me, Bev Hickson at the time, had also said, why don't we call them sunbeams? Wonderful idea. Later on, we discovered that the teens were starting to drop out of church. And we thought, ooh, we need to do something about that. And so the teen choir evolved. And we were very much in tune with making sure that there was contemporary music that they would feel comfortable with and would enjoy singing, and still had a good solid biblical message. We always added a social element so that the kids learned to love and respect each other. We also felt very strongly about the power of prayer, and so we made little prayer cards and put each child's picture, if the parents gave approval, and inside it said, hi, my name is, and there was a dove, I am in whichever choir at St. Andrews. Please pray for the Lord to bless, guide, protect, and help the young person to grow in his or her faith in the Lord. May you also be blessed as you uphold this young person in prayer. So it was meant to be twofold, for each child as well as for the person that committed to pray for them.
The choir also took a cantata called the Alleluia on the road, and that was a fun time for Don and I. We went to Quebec and we traveled around different places, different churches, Peterborough and other churches, singing the Alleluia. It's still some of my favorite music to this day. The kids did some Christian musical plays, and one of them was Colby, and I'm sure they'll always remember the fun of. It was a lot of work. There was a lot of practice. They had to learn the pieces and they had to learn the acting, but they had a great time putting that on. I don't think they'll ever forget it, those days.
They used to tape on the Lindsay radio station. Do you remember that?
Yes.
CKL1.
When Orville Locke first came, a certain Sunday every month.
Fourth Sunday of the month,
It was
St.
taped.
Andrews.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you had to tape it and then run it up to this
That's
thing.
right. And
Yeah,
originally,
I remember
when
that.
cassette tapes were first made, it was our cassette recorder, and it was sitting like up in the balcony, then it got moved down there, then it was moved beside the organ, and Bob was running that, and you know, nothing direct lines like nowadays when they can, so that's why all the air sounds and so on.
Well, I think eventually, at one time, near the end, they were recording directly.
From the, oh yeah,
Yeah.
but originally
But
it
then
started
they-
with a,
It's been quite a few years since we've been on the radio now.
oh yeah. When I was in high school, Merv Everall, one of the teachers, used to be an Anglican priest. He thought the teens in this town needed a youth service, so he organized one. Well, there was a young fellow named Bob Tompkins who had been hired at 15 to play the organ out at Little Britain United. Well, he was obviously the one to be chosen to play the organ for this youth service. There was one to be held at St. Paul's Anglican and one to be held at Cambridge Street United. Bob was going to be the organist at both. Back in those days, before polyps were removed from my vocal cords, I really could sing, and I was part of the choir. That's just when I started to get to know him a bit. Well, when we went to Teachers College, ta-da, that's when he discovered that I existed. And that began our dating, and 2 years later we were married in 1969.
We have enjoyed the ministry of many good ministers through the years. Reverend Dr. John McMurray, Reverend Ron Wallace, Reverend Dave Whitecross, and now Reverend Linda Park and Reverend Bob Quick.
Our hearts are more with Mr. Locke because he was a people's person.
Yeah.
He, in the whole community,
Yeah.
it didn't matter if you were the garbage collector or the doctor.
If you were
he
Baptist
treated
or
you
Catholic
exactly.
or what you were.
Oh, and I remember when we came to Lindsay, there was a dairy, wasn't there, on the corner of Victoria Street?
Silverwoods
Yeah.
Silverwoods.
Yeah.
And it was still there.
smelled.
Like sour milk ones.
That was in 71, when I first came to teach at the college.
I was raised on King Street at the corner of King and St. David, and I attended what was called East Ward School, but which is now known as Queen Victoria. And my father worked as plant manager at Abex, and Jim was a supervisor with the Viscase Company. His brother Ross was a policeman in Lindsay, and 3 of the boys actually served in the Second World War. And the Endicott family have been members of St. Andrews since back in the 1800s. Back in those days, there was kind of a stigma that if you were raised in the East Ward, that was kind of the slums, but today that's the East Ward is kind of the up and coming area. But back then, the East Ward was quite an industrial area. There was probably 10 or 12 factories that employed a huge amount of people. Like there was Viscase that was one of the big ones, and it ran 2 shifts and probably had around 500 employees. There was Abex, there was Schultz Die Casting, there was a chain factory. It was quite a hub of industrial in the East Ward back in those days. But unfortunately, now, today, in 2019, there's not much in the way of factory. My husband and I actually had a transport business, and back in the days, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, you could take out 8 to 10 trailer loads a day. We went to church every Sunday morning. My dad was in the choir, and his little signal to me sitting at the back was he would adjust his glasses, and that was his way of saying, I see you. I was the youngest of 3, and I cherish those memories of those seeds being sown as a little kid. Well, by grade 6, I decided, enough of this, I'm not going to Queen Street anymore. But I had a girlfriend, and most of the friends I connected with at school went to Cambridge Street United. So they invited me to join them there, and I didn't know what the pastor's class was. I thought it was just the grades 7s and 8s. That was the class all year long, which was held before church, where you joined the church.
I was nervous about telling my parents. In fact, I didn't tell them till the Saturday night that I was being confirmed the next day, because Queen Street was on that side of the river and Cambridge was on this side of the river. And part of my involvement at Cambridge was I was a cub leader there, I helped in the nursery, and I babysat the young ministers' children, which I thought was wonderful. Anyway, Mom, strangely enough, her reaction when I said that I was being confirmed was, "Why didn't you tell me? You could have got a new dress." That was major. You didn't get new clothes in my family. I had the hand-me-downs, cousins' clothes, or my sister's clothes, and it was a rare time that you got something brand new. Obviously, they didn't mind that I was joining Cambridge.
The Women's Missionary Society is going through a time of change. We aren't as involved directly in missions as we once were, and we're still trying to find our way and how we can have a voice and an effect in our church.
And know everyone on the street that I met. But today, there's so many people have moved in from other areas. Lindsay was more or less an industrial and a farming community years ago, but it's changed to more of a retirement community today, because there is really nothing here to keep the young people here once they get their education. There are no jobs for them to come back to, unfortunately, and I see down the road that this will be like a bedroom community for people to live here and probably work in Oshawa, Ajax, Pickering, even Toronto.
All things have really changed in the 30 or 40 years, 50 years we've been here.
Well, I remember as
All
a
the
teenager
stores
going
have changed.
downtown and you knew everybody that you met on the street. Well, I go downtown now and I feel as though I'm a stranger.
But I remember I used to walk Mom downtown and she'd say, and you'd see people, I'd see people and she'd say, "What do you know, everybody in town?" I didn't know, more than a few, but you would meet them downtown all the time, yeah.
I've enjoyed my association with the church, and there's a lot of memories that go back of when you were even a young child coming to church.
John is still in choir, and he also does Joy's Boys. That's no longer.
But once in a while.
Once in a while with Joy's Boys, and helps to lead the Alpha Bible studies. Our son Michael is on the session, and he sings in a group called Stan, which leads music once a month. Our daughter Amy leads music in her small church in Pickering. Tina and her husband Matt are involved with Young Life Ministry in Abbotsford, and our son Matthew resides in Newmarket and has yet to find himself a church home, but still comes to the Living Christmas Tree every year.
This has been, I think, a feature of, or a kind of a cornerstone of our work here at St. Andrews, our ministry to the community and at large. And I believe it's been very effective, and we have been blessed with having this opportunity to serve in this community.
I just wanted to share a little bit of Bob's thank you letter at the end of our time here as directors of music. Well, since I won't be around to write a letter to the choir in September because we retired in June, but I already purchased the paper, and in reality, mostly because I couldn't get my tongue rolling at the festive gathering in June. Here goes my thank yous to you. What can a leader say to adequately thank a group of people who has been so faithful in sharing its time and talent with the congregation for so many years? Some of you have been part of this group longer than others, but no matter the length of your participation, we are so grateful to have had the privilege of working with you. Thanks. Words seem so inadequate to express what's on my mind and in my heart. When I look back at all you have done, from weekly practices to hours spent learning the new tree music each year, and then all the services to share it, to the regular musical offerings at Sunday morning worship, we appreciate that there has been much time spent preparing and sharing. To Mary Lou and I, you are our special group, our closest church family, and it is very hard to say goodbye to such friends. But God has told us that now is indeed the time to step aside. We haven't a clue what avenues of service may be ahead for us, but I know that God will continue to guide us as we seek His will in our lives. We're just so thankful He gave us you in our lives for a season. Thank you to each and every one for being part of His music program with us. Now, as for that beautiful bench you gave us, I know it was prepared for life outside on the patio, but we just couldn't bring ourselves to putting it out there to be exposed to the elements. As it happens, not a coincidence, I'm sure, it fits perfectly in our front hallway, so that's where it is. After all, at my age, I need something to sit on to do up my shoes anyway. It was also nice to have been around long enough to get my own hymn book too, with my name on it. I should be able to remember where it is, or at least somebody can return it to me if they find it on a pew. Your cards and letters, so wonderfully preserved for us in the true scrapbooking style, is a treasure indeed. Your kind thoughts and words have touched us deeply. Thank you so much for all your prayers, support, and encouragement through the years. In His service, Bob and Mary Lou Tompkins.